Like most historical figures, over time, her life looked more and more like a Hollywood movie. Until it was one.
New DNA analysis linked to Cleopatra has uncovered something far more disturbing than political intrigue or royal scandal.
Every time we tell the story of Cleopatra, I think we're provoking the question, are women allowed to rule the world?
The tests point to hidden illnesses, signs of genetic collapse, and evidence of secret medical interventions buried beneath her temples.
She was a mother, she was a wife, she was a queen, she was a goddess.
And we are trying to find out what it did us.
Scientists examining the results said they had never seen a royal lineage under this kind of biological pressure. Whatever Cleopatra was fighting, it was not only Rome, it was something inside her blood, and the truth is far more terrifying than anyone expected. The mask in the mud.
It's an entrance. We can see an entrance.
The chamber was silent when the team broke through the final wall of packed earth. A cold smell rose from the darkness. It was the smell of trapped air, old resin, and something else that made one of the workers whisper that it felt wrong. Their lamps lit the space slowly. The mud was thick and black. The walls were sweating with moisture from 2,000 years underground. No one spoke at first because the room seemed like it felt aware. The team were a mixed group of archaeologists, historians, and field scientists who had been assembled for one purpose. They were searching for physical traces that could be linked in any way to Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty. They were working inside Taposiris Magna, an ancient temple complex west of Alexandria. Many experts once dismissed the site, but it gained serious attention because of one archaeologist, Dr. Kathleen Martinez, who refused to stop searching. For nearly 2 decades, Martinez has been driven by a single belief. She believes Cleopatra and Mark Antony were deliberately buried in a hidden sanctuary under Taposiris Magna to avoid being captured or displayed by their enemies. This belief came from years of studying ancient writings, temple layouts, religious customs, and political events. Martinez found records showing Cleopatra saw herself as the human form of the goddess Isis. Hence, she believed this temple was connected to rituals of death and rebirth. She believed this place would be chosen by someone who wanted to protect their body from being taken by Rome. Not everyone agreed with her. Many experts argued that Cleopatra was buried under modern Alexandria, lost forever beneath ruined streets and seawater. Others said the temple was never meant to hold royal burials. Yet Martinez continued. She followed signs that others ignored. She used her background as a former criminal lawyer to study the case like a crime scene. She tracked movements, motives, symbols, and escape paths. Her earlier work inside the temple had revealed coins with Cleopatra's image, a group of mummies wrapped with royal-style amulets, and a hidden structure that matched the layout of burial chambers used in the late Ptolemaic period. These finds convinced her that elite members of Cleopatra's circle had been placed here. In 2022, her work paid off when she uncovered the long tunnel that cut through solid bedrock. This tunnel was the first real clue that something important had been hidden deep under the temple. The current excavation team worked near one of the chambers connected to the tunnel Martinez discovered. They knew that her work had reshaped the understanding of the temple and opened the possibility that elite burials were placed here. They understood that if any artifact inside these chambers held biological traces, it could be linked to Cleopatra's family. The team leader stepped forward and held his lamp higher. He froze when he saw a cartonnage funerary mask half buried in the mud. For a moment, no one understood what they were seeing. A funerary mask should never be lying on a floor like this. Who had placed it here? Why was it not attached to a body? What kind of event could rip a mask from a mummy and leave it exposed in open mud? These questions spread through the team and created a sharp sense of fear. Something violent or catastrophic had happened inside this chamber, long before any modern archaeologist entered it. It made sense once they looked closer at the walls. Part of the ceiling had collapsed in ancient times, and heavy water from seasonal flooding had pushed soil and debris into the chamber. The force of that collapse had torn open one of the inner niches where burial equipment had been stored. The mask had been carried forward by the flood of mud and trapped there when the water receded. This explained why it lay partly exposed on the floor instead of resting on a body. The mask was whole. It was sealed under hardened layers of linen and plaster. Faint pieces of gold were stuck to the surface. One of the younger archaeologists whispered that the face looked like it was watching them. No one corrected him. The fear in the room was real. Everyone knew that items that survive in perfect condition inside a site connected to Cleopatra's era are extremely rare. They often hold something important and sometimes something unsettling. The team cleared the mud around the mask with slow and careful movements. They lifted it with gloved hands and saw dried resin inside the nose and mouth openings. Embedded in the resin were tiny fragments of bone dust and traces of skin cells. Resin can trap organic material the way tree sap traps insects. It seals the material from air and moisture. It freezes the moment of death in a hardened shell. This mask protected the biological signature of the person who wore it. A historian on the team spoke in a quiet voice. He said that if this mask belonged to someone from Cleopatra's household, the DNA inside it could change everything. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood the weight of what they were holding. They understood they might be holding the first real piece of genetic evidence connected to Cleopatra's bloodline. The mask was sealed inside a climate-controlled crate and prepared for transfer to a scientific team. A specialist explained that the resin inside the mask had hardened like stone. It could not be scraped or drilled without destroying the DNA. The resin had to be softened through a slow chemical process, and this process could take several days before a single safe sample could be removed. The team understood the delay. Ancient DNA trapped inside resin is fragile and can turn to dust if handled too quickly. Since the result could take time, the excavation team continued the search. They moved deeper into the adjoining rooms of Taposiris Magna to document whatever else had survived the collapse and the flooding. They believed Cleopatra's story was buried in more than one place inside this temple. They were right. The next discovery would come faster than the mask results, and it would carry its own set of disturbing questions. The infant jars. The team moved deeper into the chamber system while the mask waited for slow processing. They entered a narrow passage that opened into a smaller room with thick clay on the floor. The air felt heavy. One of the workers put on a gas mask because the smell in the room was strong enough to burn the throat. This happens often in sealed burial environments where old organic material breaks down and releases harmful fumes. When the lights were raised, the team went silent. 6 ceramic jars stood against the wall in a straight row. Each jar was sealed with a hardened resin cap. The jars rested inside a carved niche that looked like a place used for ritual offerings. The team lifted the first jar and opened it under controlled conditions. Inside was linen wrapped around the bones of an infant who had died before reaching 1 year of age. The second jar held a similar bundle. The third jar held smaller bones from a fetus that never reached full term. The room became quiet as each jar revealed the same tragic pattern. All 6 jars held infants or late-term fetal remains. The physical condition of the bones disturbed the team even more. Several skulls had unusual shapes. Some were wide in the back and compressed in the front. One skull had a twist that pointed to a growth problem that began before birth. The arm and leg bones showed abnormal shortening. The ribs of 2 infants curved in unnatural ways that could only form during life or fetal development. A historian whispered that these children belonged to an elite family because poor families did not bury infants in sealed jars inside a sacred chamber. A historian then explained something that made the room feel colder. Taposiris Magna was not an ordinary temple. It was one of the main cult centers for the goddess Isis. Cleopatra publicly claimed she was the living form of Isis and used this temple to strengthen her connection to the goddess. Families who served her personally often buried their dead inside Isis temples because they believed this placed the child under the direct protection of the queen's divine identity. Many of these families were linked to the Ptolemies through marriage or shared ancestry. The Ptolemaic ruling house practiced repeated sibling marriage, which means brothers and sisters often married each other to keep power inside the bloodline. This creates a dangerous genetic condition because both parents carry the same harmful genes. When this continues for many generations, the defects intensify and spread into related families. The infants inside the jars came from this world. Their deformities were the same type seen in dynasties with severe inbreeding. The team understood what this meant. These jars were physical proof that the Ptolemaic bloodline was collapsing long before Cleopatra was born. The remains were placed in sterile containers and sent to the scientific team. The scientists wore gas masks when they opened the containers because decayed biological material can release fumes. They extracted bone samples from the femur shafts of each infant. The results arrived quickly because bones do not require a long preparation process like resin. The DNA tests revealed the same recessive mutation repeated in several infants. This mutation is known to cause major deformities when both parents carry the same defective gene. A physical anthropologist confirmed that the pattern matched hereditary decline in closely intermarried families. Members of the excavation team were shocked. They realized they were looking at the early stages of the same genetic collapse that shaped Cleopatra's own dynasty. The scientific team said these jars were one of the clearest examples of multi-generational biological failure found in the ancient Mediterranean. The infants revealed how the dynasty was breaking down from inside. The mask would reveal how this collapse shaped Cleopatra herself. The endocrine mutation. Why Cleopatra's mind worked at an unusual speed. When the scientific team finally received the softened resin from the funerary mask, they prepared the clean room with extreme caution. The resin shell had taken days to hydrate because even the smallest mistake could destroy the biological traces inside it. The scientists worked in silence as the first sample was removed. They placed it into the sequencing machine and waited for the first readings to appear. When the data began to load, the room shifted from quiet interest to tense focus. One of the geneticists leaned closer to the screen and asked the others to check the numbers again. Something inside the sequence was not normal. The sample carried a mutation that affects how the thyroid responds to hormone signals. The thyroid controls energy, metabolism, and mental speed. This specific mutation increases the sensitivity of the thyroid to even small amounts of hormone. A medical specialist explained that this creates a constant state of high energy inside the body. The person feels alert, driven, and mentally fast. The geneticist said that this mutation is rare in modern populations and can be extremely powerful in combination with other inherited traits. The scientists looked at the readings again and saw that the mutation was strong enough to influence both the body and the brain. Behavioral geneticists studied the sequence and explained that this type of mutation often leads to rapid verbal fluency. It can make a person process information faster than those around them. It creates heightened alertness, emotional intensity, and a strong ability to influence others. The team discussed how ancient writers described Cleopatra. They said she spoke at a fast pace, shifted between languages with ease, and reacted quickly to changing situations. Her meetings often moved faster than her advisors could follow. Her communication was direct, sharp, and highly focused. She showed strong attention to detail and pushed conversations forward with unusual intensity. These traits matched the mutation on the screen in a way that was difficult for the scientists to ignore. Medical specialists also pointed out the dark side of this condition. The mutation can cause insomnia because the body struggles to slow itself down. It can cause a fast heartbeat even during rest. It can create mood changes that rise and fall without warning. It places strain on the body over time because a system that runs at high speed burns energy constantly. One scientist said quietly that this kind of mutation would make a person brilliant in front of a crowd, but exhausted when alone. Another scientist added that it would make someone appear fearless, even when their body was reaching its limits. The team realized that Cleopatra's historical behavior matched someone who lived with a body that refused to rest. Her late-night meetings, her rapid decisions, her intense interactions, and her ability to command attention all fit the profile of endocrine overactivation. A historian on the archaeological team asked how Cleopatra might have tried to control these symptoms. The question hung in the air because no one knew yet. The mask had revealed her speed, her intensity, and her constant mental fire. It had not revealed how she survived it. The answer would come from the next discovery, inside the temple. It suggested that Cleopatra did not accept her fate. She may have tried to break the cycle that destroyed her family. The mixed DNA in the resin. The funerary mask findings pushed the team to explore deeper into the temple. The next discovery came from an auxiliary room on the far side of Taposiris Magna. This room looked different from the others. It had stone shelves and shallow pits in the floor. A specialist said the layout matched preparation rooms used for medical treatment or for embalming work carried out on elite individuals. As the team cleared loose debris from the floor, a worker uncovered a small clay jar sealed shut with a thick layer of hardened resin. The jar was lying near one of the shallow pits instead of being placed in a burial position. This was the first sign that it had been used in a working process, rather than as an offering. The jar was documented and secured. Containers of this kind often held oils, resins, or fluids that were used during medical procedures or during the preparation of the body. In the lab, researchers softened a section of the resin and collected samples from the inner wall. They expected to detect plant oils or embalming substances. Instead, they found two different human DNA profiles. The first profile carried markers common among Hellenistic elites in the Eastern Mediterranean, a pattern closely tied to the Ptolemaic ruling class. The second profile carried markers linked to Roman Mediterranean populations. The results were confirmed multiple times. There was no contamination. The resin jar held biological traces from two unrelated individuals. The scientific team needed a clear explanation. A medical historian reviewed the evidence and provided the most plausible answer based on historical practices. He said that elite Ptolemaic families often attempted primitive treatments on infants born with weakness, deformities, or breathing problems. These conditions were common because repeated marriages between relatives created severe hereditary damage. Infants were often born with soft skulls, twisted limbs, swelling, or failure to grow. The treatment method was simple. The resin jar would have held a mixture of oils, herbs, tree resin, and sometimes animal fat. This mixture was warmed in the shallow pit until it softened. A healer used cloths or wooden tools to rub the mixture onto the child's chest, joints, or skull. The goal was to strengthen the body, improve breathing, reduce swelling, and relieve pain. These treatments could not fix genetic damage, but elite families believed they offered support. Foreign specialists were sometimes brought in when the infant showed signs of severe illness. Roman attendants or healers were known to assist with massage, bone setting, or herbal application. If a Roman healer handled the child and then dipped the same cloth or tool back into the jar, biological traces from both the infant and the healer would be carried into the mixture. As the resin cooled and hardened again, it sealed their DNA permanently inside the jar. This explanation caused unease among the excavation team. It meant that elite families connected to Cleopatra were already seeking foreign intervention to counter the biological failures inside their bloodline. It meant that the genetic instability shown in the infant jars was not only known, but feared. It also connected directly to Cleopatra's later actions. When her brother Ptolemy XIII was old enough to serve as her co-ruler and expected husband, she refused to share power with him. Their conflict escalated into open war inside Alexandria. When her second brother, Ptolemy XIV, was placed beside her, she again refused to produce an heir with him. Instead, Cleopatra formed unions with two Roman leaders who had no genetic link to her. Julius Caesar was the first. Her decision to approach him inside Alexandria was usually described as political strategy, but the biological evidence now suggested an additional motive. She needed an heir who did not carry the collapsing DNA of her dynasty. After Caesar's assassination, she aligned with Mark Antony. To learn whether she succeeded in breaking that cycle, the scientific team turned to the last living branch of her family in Mauretania, the Mauretanian bloodline. The scientific team understood that if Cleopatra had truly tried to break her collapsing bloodline by turning to Rome, the only way to confirm whether she succeeded was to study the descendants who survived through her daughter, Cleopatra Selene. Archaeologists never confirmed Selene's tomb, but bones from Mauretanian royal cemeteries were recovered during 19th and early 20th century digs. Several of these remains were stored in European collections with incomplete documentation. None had ever been tested with modern genetic methods. The scientific team selected samples from two individuals most likely tied to Cleopatra Selene's extended royal line. The samples included a molar from a young male and a fragment of petrous bone from a female relative. The samples were handled under strict conditions. At first, the team expected ordinary genetic patterns. That expectation collapsed once the sequencing began. Both samples showed the same mutation found earlier in the funerary mask at Taposiris Magna. It was a mutation that increased sensitivity to thyroid hormones, raising metabolic speed and emotional intensity. It created fast thinking, heightened alertness, and rapid bursts of behavior. It also caused insomnia, mood instability, and long-term strain on major organs. The room became silent as the data loaded on the screen. The scientists understood immediately that Cleopatra had passed this condition through her daughter and into the Mauretanian bloodline. This was no longer a theory, it was evidence. The historians reviewed Roman texts describing members of the Mauretanian court. Several accounts mentioned unusual behavior. Some royals spoke with unusual speed, others slept only a few hours a night. Some were described as sharp and commanding one moment, then emotionally overwhelmed the next. A document from the Roman Senate expressed concern about instability among the heirs. Another record described a young prince who collapsed during a public ceremony and developed swelling in the neck, a symptom linked to thyroid problems. These descriptions matched the mutation now confirmed in the remains. Then the team noticed a darker pattern. Several young members of the Mauretanian dynasty disappeared from the historical record without explanation. They were born, mentioned briefly, and then erased. The scientific team and historians discussed the possibility that some of these children may have died early from complications related to the mutation. The Romans often concealed royal weaknesses to prevent political unrest. A historian suggested that some missing records were destroyed intentionally because they revealed a hereditary flaw tied to Cleopatra's line. Cleopatra's attempt to escape the problems inside her dynasty had only partial success. By turning to Rome, she avoided the extreme genetic damage caused by sibling marriage, but the dangerous endocrine mutation survived. It traveled across the Mediterranean. It shaped the health, behavior, and political fate of her descendants. This left the scientific team with one final question. If the mutation shaped entire generations of her descendants, did Cleopatra try to manage her own condition during her lifetime? To answer that, they turned to the next source of evidence hidden inside Taposiris Magna, the Chamber of Treatment. The team continued working along the lower corridors of Taposiris Magna, moving beyond the preparation rooms and burial niches. They soon broke into a chamber that immediately felt wrong. It was sealed behind a tight stone doorway with no markings and no religious symbols. Two narrow stone tables stood in the center of the room. Their size and shape showed they were not designed for embalming. They were built for living patients who needed to be held still. Along the walls lay bronze tools arranged with precision. The instruments included scalpels, small enough for delicate incisions, probes for clearing blockages, and blunt tools used to apply pressure. None were large enough for surgery on corpses. These were for repeated therapeutic procedures. On a carved stone shelf, the team found jars with hardened residues. There were no funerary objects, no offerings, and no burial markers. Everything pointed to a controlled treatment room hidden from public view. The scientific team analyzed the residues. Chemical tests revealed opium alkaloids, blue lotus extracts, and compounds used in the ancient world to steady breathing and regulate swelling. These substances were used on patients with chronic conditions involving hormonal imbalance, heart strain, agitation, and sudden spikes of energy. The combination was not typical for emergency care. It was used for long-term management of someone who needed to remain functional despite ongoing symptoms. Medical historians examined the layout and confirmed that treatment rooms of this type existed in a few places in the ancient world, but they were always connected to elite patients. Access to these rooms was extremely restricted. Only attendants with direct clearance to a royal household would be allowed near them. The team began to understand that this room was not meant for general public use. It served a single patient who required continuous monitoring. The discussion shifted quickly once the tools and substances were matched to the effects of the genetic mutation identified earlier. The mutation caused fast mental processing, high energy, mood instability, and dangerous stress on the heart and endocrine system. A person with this mutation would experience periods of intense focus followed by exhaustion or emotional strain. They would need frequent stabilizing treatments to maintain control. The historians recognized a disturbing pattern. Ancient accounts describe Cleopatra as unusually energetic, prone to sleepless nights, able to work for long hours, and capable of sudden emotional force during political negotiations. Writers recorded that she showed extreme confidence in public, but became volatile under pressure. The team began to suspect that this hidden treatment room existed for someone of high status, who had to appear strong at all times, despite a serious medical condition. The only individual inside this temple's political orbit who fit that profile was Cleopatra herself. She spent years near this site while preparing for war, negotiating with Rome, and carrying pregnancies. If she was managing a chronic condition, she would have required a private treatment facility where symptoms could be controlled without witnesses. The archaeologists understood the implications. Cleopatra may not only have ruled Egypt, she may have ruled while fighting a condition that threatened to break her body and mind every day she held the throne. Her public strength might have been a performance built on quiet desperation. Every speech, every negotiation, every declaration of power may have depended on a hidden network of treatments carried out in silence beneath the temple. The thought unsettled the room. It meant the most feared and celebrated woman of the ancient world may have held her empire together while secretly struggling to hold herself together. Now that the archaeological structure was clear, the scientific team prepared for the final test. They needed to determine whether Cleopatra's maternal line carried a deeper genetic signature that survived beyond her dynasty. The living echo. The scientific team prepared one final analysis. The funerary mask had produced mitochondrial DNA fragments. These fragments were damaged, but readable enough for haplogroup identification. Mitochondrial DNA is passed only from mother to child. This meant that if the haplogroup could be identified, it would represent Cleopatra's direct maternal line. The result left the team deeply shocked. The sequencing run produced a clear match to a rare haplogroup still found today in a few isolated communities. The data identified a maternal lineage shared by small populations in Greece, Anatolia, and parts of coastal Egypt. These regions once formed the core network of Ptolemaic trade, settlement, and migration during Cleopatra's lifetime. The scientific team reviewed the map and saw the pattern immediately. The modern distribution matched the ancient world mapped in historical records. Wherever Ptolemaic families settled, traces of Cleopatra's maternal line continued forward. This finding did not identify living descendants by name. It did something more unsettling. It confirmed that Cleopatra's maternal line did not disappear with her dynasty. The end of her political power did not erase her biological presence. Her DNA had traveled quietly through generations of ordinary people who never knew they carried it. The team discussed the implications carefully. Mitochondrial DNA is extremely stable across generations. Even when kingdoms fall and identities change, maternal lines survive through daughters, granddaughters, and distant relatives. Cleopatra's own body may be lost, but her maternal signature proved she had not vanished from the human population. Part of her still lives in families who carried the lineage unknowingly.